Ouch!
As I was heading towards the stairs after getting off the train, a scream-like sound startled me. Turning towards the noise, I saw a girl with a white cane had fallen over. An apparent middle-aged man, who seemed to have bumped into her, was just standing there looking down at her without helping.
Damn, in the way.
The man clicked his tongue and muttered an expletive, then carelessly walked over the tactile paving and continued on his way. The girl seemed unable to get up, having fallen inside the safety line. I quickly rushed over to her. "Are you okay?" I assumed someone visually impaired might be uncomfortable being suddenly touched. So, I consciously kept a distance and spoke to her, especially since she's a young lady. Besides, the person who scared her and acted rudely was a man. It'd be really scary if a stranger whispered into your ear out of nowhere.
I'm fine.
The girl said, trying to stand up, but immediately winced and sat back down. Seems like she twisted her ankle. Just then, the sign lit up indicating the arrival of the next train. "Sorry, can you lean on my shoulder for a bit?" I offered, but she looked uncertain about what to do. "The train's coming soon. It's safer if we move back a bit. Hope it's okay if I help you by holding your arm." When I addressed her, she nodded in agreement. Helping her up, her face twisted even more with pain. There's no way she could walk on her own. "Were you planning to catch the train heading downtown from this platform earlier?" When I asked her, she explained she was heading home. "I do have some errands near this station, but I can't just leave her like this." The train was about to arrive. On the spur of the moment, I decided to accompany her home. She hesitated at first, but realizing she couldn't manage alone, she agreed. Soon, we boarded the arriving train. I figured she'd be wary about a stranger suddenly accompanying her home, so I introduced myself, told her my name's Ryan Miller, a 30-year-old working in a specialized trading company. Talking rapidly, I pulled out my smartphone and typed into the chat app that I use to communicate with my boss. "I'm really sorry. Something has come up, so I'll be late." As soon as I sent the message, my boss called me back as if he had been waiting. "I can't answer the phone. I'm on a train." I ended the call unilaterally and sent another message, to which my boss immediately replied,
"I'll handle things here. Just get here as soon as possible."
I could almost feel the anger radiating from the text. I was afraid, because my boss is a dignified person, but I hoped he would understand once I explained the situation. It was all I could do to hope. Perhaps I had been too focused on typing. It seemed I had answered the girl's quiet question with an incoherent response.
What?
The girl raised her voice in surprise. "Oh, sorry. What were we talking about?" I looked up from my smartphone and faced the girl.
Did you have something to attend to?
She probably sensed people's presence more precisely because she couldn't see. Maybe she had noticed that I was a bit flustered and that something was off. The girl looked worried. I had been so preoccupied on the platform. I thought she was a young girl, but on closer inspection, she might be a high school student. That would make sense. The girl, holding a white cane, was walking alone, so she couldn't be that young. I apologized to her for worrying her and explained that I had some work-related matters, but had already informed them, so it was okay. She introduced herself as Mia Thompson and shared that she is a freshman attending a school for the visually impaired. I didn't know because I rarely use the station, but it seems to be the nearest one to her school. Today, she had committee activities and got out later than the usual dismissal time. And she isn't completely blind. She is what is generally called visually impaired. Since I, for my part, was preoccupied with my issues, worried about being late for an important matter, I didn't notice, but Mia sitting next to me is a bit shaky. It must have been a significant issue for Mia, who started commuting by train alone from high school. Such an irresponsible person. It's embarrassing as an adult, older than them, and as a man. Hoping to alleviate her fear a bit, I intentionally spoke about light topics until we reached her nearest station. I am clumsy, so I have plenty of small mistakes to talk about. Sometimes I feel pathetic, but it is good to be of help in this situation. Her tense face gradually relaxed. When we got off the train together, she called home from the platform after asking me. She was going to ask to be picked up, but unfortunately, she couldn't get through. Perhaps her family was worried about Mia, who was returning home later than usual, and went out to pick her up.
My mom is pretty scatterbrained. She might have left her cell at home and headed to the station.
Seeing Mia fidgeting shyly, I felt the adolescence from her for the first time since we met. See, I told you I'm clumsy. I do the same kind of things. Trying to console her, she showed a shy smile. I decided to give Mia a piggyback since she said her home is not more than a 15-minute walk away. We shouldn't pass by if we take a cab. I know I'm just an old man, but I shouldn't stink. I said in a purposely playful tone, and she smiled.
I'm heavy.
She seemed reluctant as I piggybacked her, but in reality, she was very light. However, an accident occurred as soon as I piggybacked her. My pants tore at the seat when I braced myself. A loud ripping noise was made, and she noticed it too, and we both laughed. We ran into her mom when we were about halfway to the house. It was a straight road, so it was nice that we didn't pass by each other. I explained to her mom, who looked surprised and dumbfounded, while still piggybacking her. Her mom thanked me and tried to take over piggybacking her, but it would be too much of a burden for a woman, no matter how light Mia is. I declared that I would carry her home, and we headed there while talking. It was my second time introducing myself. When we arrived, I slowly let Mia down at the front door, and the two of them tried to keep me from leaving.
I'll sew your pants right away.
I appreciated their kindness, but I had things to do, so I excused myself and left. I called my boss as I headed to the station, thinking he surely wouldn't be waiting any longer. "Just get here now," he yelled, and I ran to the station. Yes, today was the day of my arranged date, set up by my boss. I arrived at the station, where I met Mia again, and by the time I reached the designated restaurant, it was over an hour past our originally agreed time. While hastily fixing my disheveled hair from running frantically, I noticed my boss and a woman sitting at the table, messily fixing my disheveled hair. I am so sorry for being extremely late. I apologized as soon as I saw them. Just as the woman I was supposed to meet began to speak, a loud voice came from behind.
Since Alice said, "Let's wait a bit more," I had no choice but to wait. What's with that attire?
Fitzgerald, the father of today's matchmaking partner, Alice. It seemed he had stepped out and had just returned to witness the tear in my trousers.
Is that the appropriate dress code for a matchmaking meeting? We are being taken for granted.
Fitzgerald was furious. Before I could make any excuses, he walked past me, grabbed Alice's hand, and made her stand up.
This meeting is off with someone who can't even keep time.
He forcefully pulled the resisting Alice and left the restaurant.
What are you going to do? You trying to ruin my reputation, Ryan.
My boss glared at me and hastily followed the two. Fitzgerald's company is an important client of ours. Alice, who is the only daughter of the president, is regarded as the future president of the company. Rumor had it that, in addition to basic academic skills, she had been taught business management and imperial wisdom by her dad since she was young. And I have managed to anger such a person. My head hurts. Afterwards, no matter how much I tried to contact my boss, he neither answered the phone or responded to my messages on the chat tool. The next day, I went to the office with much trepidation, and it was like walking on pins and needles. It seems my boss has spilled the beans to everyone in the office about the broken engagement. Everyone in the workplace blamed me. In the first place, having an arranged date with the heiress of Fitzgerald trading was out of my league. But I only went because I was relentlessly asked to. I initially declined when my boss brought up the meeting as it was a burden. However, it seemed that I was the one specifically requested by the other party. I have no professional interaction with our clients, so even my boss didn't know why it had to be me. My boss, unable to get his apology accepted by Fitzgerald, was in deep trouble and took it out on me each time. After enduring an uncomfortable week in the office, an unexpected person came to visit me. 9 days after the meeting day, Alice, Fitzgerald's daughter, visited the company. My boss and I dealt with it and led her to the reception room. There was no sign of displeasure from her.
It seems you helped Mia.
Alice said to me with a smile. Mia is the name of the visually impaired girl I helped on the day of the meeting. I hadn't explained the reason for my tardiness to Alice. So how did she know her name? While I was lost in thought and unable to speak, Alice threw more mysterious words at me.
I'm friend with her. So, I asked her what happened that day.
Friends with almost a 10-year age gap. My confused face and my boss, who's more out of the loop, were explained to by Alice. Fitzgerald Trading is also committed to charitable activities, inviting students from special needs schools, care schools, and schools for the blind to performances by circus troupes and theater groups funded by the company. The employees are also active in volunteer activities, and Alice has been involved since her student days. At first, she was reluctant, seeming like a hypocrite. She met Mia during one of those activities, volunteering for a reading program at an elementary school for the blind. Alice was always aware that she was different from others due to the daughter of CEO Fitzgerald. Her friendships were largely formed due to her status, and she never had someone she could truly open her heart to. However, meeting Mia has become an opportunity for her to face herself. After she finished reading the book, Mia approached her and shared her impressions. Such a kind voice. It seemed to reflect a kind personality. She praised. Alice is often misunderstood as a strong-willed woman or highly prideful person, but she felt saved by Mia's words, who didn't judge by appearances. Listening to this, I reflected that I too had been judging her without knowing her. I thought she's high maintenance and wouldn't get along with me without knowing anything about Alice, just by her appearance and rumors. Her interaction with Mia became a catalyst, and Alice became more proactive in volunteering, participating unrelated to the company's operations. 5 days after the arranged date, she went to the regular volunteer activity at the school for the blind and heard about me from Mia. And she understood the reason for my tardiness.
She was really concerned about your clothing and talked about wanting to pay for the repairs.
Remembering the embarrassing moment when I showed Alice my torn pants, my face turned red.
I've come to apologize for my father's rudeness.
Alice said. She found out about the circumstances of that day and wanted to apologize in person. So she went out of her way to come to the office. It's understandable that your dad got angry, so please, don't worry about it. Even as I conveyed this, she shook her head and apologized once again. She began to speak.
Actually, there's another thing I want to talk about.
She started confessing with an awkward air. It turned out that, actually, Alice and I had met when she was a high school student 10 years ago. Back then, Alice was a high school senior, preparing for SAT. She generally studied in libraries. But when things weren't going well, she would study in a cafe to change her mood.
One day, someone placed a paper coaster on my table where I was constantly sighing.
I braced myself, having a feeling I knew what this was about. 10 years ago, I was a college student and worked part-time in a cafe. To summarize what she recounted, the coaster had written, "You're always studying hard. Keep it up." When she looked around, she met eyes with a staff member who was cleaning another table, and he smiled warmly at her. Although he was polite and formal during service, he seemed somewhat aloof, and this friendly demeanor apparently made her heart flutter. She even checked the name tag on his chest, and saw it said, Ryan. From that moment, Alice's one-sided love began. However, the staff quit his job 6 months later, and she couldn't see him anymore. It became a fleeting romantic memory. When my eyes met hers after she finished talking that much, my heart won't stop racing. I should remember meeting a beauty like Alice frequently for 6 months, but I don't remember at all. As if seeing through my heart, she added,
I only started caring about my appearance after I started working. I wasn't interested in fashion until I graduated. I was plain.
She, who always stands tall and dignified, shrinks shyly and mumbles in a stooped posture. Seeing her like that, I suddenly remember a regular high school girl in a uniform. Alice was extremely surprised when she saw me during a business meeting at our company. Because the cafe attendant she had a crush on appeared before her in a suit, and when her dad told her it's time to settle down and brought up an arranged date, she mentioned my name. You must have been opposed by your dad, suggesting someone more outstanding from a much larger company, right? I figured it might be hard for Alice to bring it up, so opened my mouth first. She nods with reservation.
But I opposed. It was my first defiance.
Alice smiles faintly and shares the details of her battle with her dad.
I've always been a good girl following what my dad said. I wanted to at least choose my marriage partner, so I insisted. But then it all turned out like that.
I realize that I have not only put my boss in a bad position by being late, but also ruined Alice's face. However, it must have been convenient for Fitzgerald, my tardiness. He was against it from the start, so it might have even felt lucky that he could easily find an excuse to break it off.
After hearing from Mia, I am convinced that you are exactly as I had imagined outside of work as well.
It's nice to hear that, but she might be disappointed because there's an aspect that's too embellished.
Would you like to be friends with me?
Sure, being suddenly told about a marriage meeting made me feel awkward. But of course, I welcome being friends. After that, we started participating in volunteer activities together. I met Mia again and got along well. After such days continued for several months, I had the chance to meet Mr. Fitzgerald privately.
I have heard from my daughter. I am sorry about that day.
He apologized for leaving without hearing the circumstances. On the day of the marriage meeting, it was natural to scold me for being late, and I had no grudge. But it's good that the misunderstanding was cleared up. Alice, while observing work manners, does wear makeup during work, but she basically doesn't wear any in her private time. Seeing her innocent face and personality just like when she was in high school, I am gradually being drawn to her. I was raised in a single-father family, and my father has been prone to illness since I was little, and we were poor. After graduating from high school, I started working to provide for my family. Every morning, amidst the echoing mechanical sounds that resonate and blend in with the noise, my heart aches as I see former classmates happily heading towards the university. A sight reminiscent of the past. Is my life just going to end here, in this factory? In such a gloomy mood, I watched my friends. Then, One of my friends noticed me and came over with a bright smile.
Hey, Jake.
When that unchanging smile was directed at me, I felt relieved. I still feel like I'm in the same world as these guys.
I didn't recognize you, Jake.
Yeah, you've aged a bit, haven't you? Working really does age you, huh?
My friend's innocent words pierced my chest.
Oh. We're gonna be late. See you, Jake.
I waved at my friends with a smile.
Hey, Miller, how long are you going to stand there?
My factory supervisor called my name, and I hurried back to work. I feel like their world is no longer one I could fit into, which gives me a heartache. Going back to work, amidst the simple tasks, I had developed a habit of constantly thinking about my own dreams in my mind. I had a dream too. I had a dream of becoming a doctor. My mother died from a disease when I was in elementary school. As a little kid, holding my mother's hand as she drew her last breath, I felt her hand was still slightly warm, and I couldn't help but think that she could be saved. She's definitely still alive. That's what I convinced myself of. Now, I understand that nothing could be done at that time, but back then, I thought, why can't we save lives that can be saved? Why are we giving up? This made me aspire to be a doctor someday. But as I grew older, I began to realize that my family was poor and that dreaming such a thing was impossible for me. I knew my life was beyond my control, almost as if I had given up. When I, exhausted from work at the factory, returned home, my father had prepared dinner for me.
Hey, Jake.
Hey, Dad? My father was the epitome of a good dad. He raised me single-handedly, worked tirelessly, took care of the house, attended school events. He truly gave it his all. It happened when my dad served me my portion of the meal.
Cough, cough.
With a big cough, my father began to clutch his chest and cough uncontrollably. Dad, you okay? He couldn't respond to my word, leaning against the table, and the glass on the table toppled with a clatter and fell to the floor. The shattered glass. I reached out my hand to my father, who was about to fall onto the shards. Dad. But my hand didn't reach my father. With a thud, he fell onto the floor. I called an ambulance with trembling hands for my unconscious father. With a loud siren echoing, my dad received every desperate life-saving measures in the ambulance. When we got to the hospital, they immediately took Dad away, and I was left pacing up and down the sterile white corridors, occasionally stopping in front of my dad's room. What if my dad disappears in front of me just like my mom? Yeah, an ominous premonition kept crossing my mind. And that premonition came true. Now, I'm sitting here in my dad's funeral suit. To be honest, I can't remember much since the moment I was told at the hospital that my dad had passed away. I remember at least calling my grandma, but even now, looking at my dad's portrait, it doesn't feel real. Even though I saw his remains, it feels like my heart isn't here, as if it's floating. I was staring at my dad's smiling face in the portrait.
Jake, let your aunts take care of things.
Relatives are bustling around me, saying that my grandma couldn't come because she's in a nursing home with bad legs. I remember she cried a lot when I told her that my dad had died over the phone.
But what will you do, Jake?
You're working, aren't you?
We can't take you in.
What about the funeral expenses?
We'll use the cash gifts we received for that.
They must think I can't hear them, My relatives were worrying about whether I would be a burden or if they had enough money. I can take care of myself, I retorted, but only inside my heart. I don't have the energy to say it out loud. What comes to mind are the times I spent with my dad. My dad who would come to my open school day. He would make a lunch box for the sports festival even though he was clumsy. All he did was to make sure I was never inconvenienced. A single tear trickled down from my eye. Dad, I wanted to give you a break. Let me repay you. Just as I was thinking that, an old classmate appeared among the attendees. He bowed respectfully to me after clasping his hands together in prayer. Despite his respectful attitude, what I heard from him was cruel.
That guy's Poe, and now he's lost his family. What's he gonna do?
That's just tragic, isn't it?
No education, no parents. Right.
I felt even more dejected by their condescending words. I just wanted to say goodbye to my dad, but the noise was too annoying. It felt like it wasn't a farewell to my dad, but rather an exposure of how much I lacked. Is there anyone who will truly mourn for my dad? That's when it happened.
You're Jake, right?
When my name was called, I turned to the voice. There was a very refined gentleman who seemed out of place in my humble, impoverished home. He looked at me kindly and patted my shoulder.
You look just like your dad.
Then the man started to speak a little louder.
You see, I'm really grateful to your dad, Carter.
To my dad.
Yes, I transferred schools when I was in high school. The reason was that my dad's company went bankrupt and we ran away in the middle of the night. Because of that, I was bullied by my classmates and I felt like I didn't belong anywhere. But Carter was different. He always treated me without any prejudice.
I was intently listening to a story about my dad I never knew. It feels like it just happened yesterday. Here's how the man who was talking to me with such familiarity recounted his story. The man had run away during the night and moved to a rural area. Perhaps because it was a small town, rumors of his escape spread quickly throughout the community, causing his parents to lose their place of work and find themselves in deep distress. At his new high school, it seems his classmates had disparaged him as a coward and a pauper. During these hard times, my father, Carter, approached the man. They played together by the river like any normal friends, even went fishing. Realizing that the man's family was struggling financially, my father invited the man's family to his own home for dinner, and they spent a joyful time together. Despite being abandoned by their relatives, Carter's family treated them with utmost kindness, expecting nothing in return. Then, my grandfather found a place for the man's father to work. The man told me that my father and grandparents were the ones who had saved him. Tears welled up in my eyes. My father had always been a truly kind-hearted person.
I had always wanted to meet Carter, but by the time I graduated high school, he had moved away. I didn't know where he was, and I've been searching for him ever since.
I shared a story I knew. It was about a friend from Carter's high school days that I'd heard about from him. Wait a second, are you Mr. Williams?
Huh?
The man looked at me with wide eyes. My father often mentioned Williams when he talked about his high school days, so that's why.
You remembered after all this time, and yet I came to see you so late. I apologize for my tardiness. My name is Williams.
I'm Jake. I introduced myself to Mr. Williams a bit late. Then, with a bit of a moist gleam in his eyes, Mr. Williams spoke up again. This time, not to me, but to the attendees.
I've been here paying respects to Carter, but isn't this supposed to be a precious time to say farewell to the departed? I'm deeply hurt by the insensitive comments I've been hearing.
Upon hearing this, the people around immediately fell silent. Their shrugs and facial expressions said it all. They didn't care. "Thank you." When I quietly thanked him, Mr. Williams looked serious.
I wanted to come here and express my gratitude. I owe my life to Carter. Therefore, Jake, I want you to let me thank you.
I couldn't understand what Mr. Williams was talking about. That's too much of an exaggeration.
If Carter and your parents hadn't helped my family back then, I wouldn't be here today. Carter taught me the importance of being kind and caring towards others. With those values, I started running my own business. Because I was always able to work compassionately, my business prospered, and I was able to repay my parents' debts. But all of this, it's all thanks to Carter.
I realized just how much my father meant to him. It made me proud of my father, and I was glad to be his son.
Jake, you really take after Carter.
Do you think so? People often tell me I resemble him in appearance, so I thought that might be it. But as Mr. Williams looked at me, he smiled kindly.
Just from watching you here for a short while, I can tell you're a really strong person who can quietly endure hardship, and you are someone who carries a deep kindness.
Mr. Williams said that and petted my head.
Jake, you did well. I'm sure it was tough for you being alone, but it's okay. I'm on your side.
Tears started to stream down my face. I see, it really had been tough. I had just been desperately concealing the fact that I had lost my father, forcing myself to stay calm. I was on the verge of breaking down from anxiety, but I ignored my feelings. From now on, would I be all alone? Is it not allowed to rely on someone? I was filled with such anxiety, and at the same time, I wanted to see my father and do more for him. Amidst these feelings, I was here. I shed tears as if to spit out the lump in my heart to Mr. Williams, who seemed to understand these feelings.
Thanks to Carter, I am alive. So, I want to thank Jake. I want you to allow me to return the favor I couldn't do for Carter.
I didn't really wish for that and thought about refusing, but Mr. Williams didn't let go of my hand tightly. So, I decided to accept Mr. Williams's gratitude. From there, it was a series of events. Mr. Williams ended up paying for the funeral expenses. I said there were condolences, but Mr. Williams said, "Jake, you keep this money." And then, Mr. Williams did everything for me. I was really grateful for his thoughtful gesture. The heartless words of the attendees heard during the funeral were gone. And when I got to the crematorium, I saw my father's smoke stretching out into the blue sky. My father must have been worried about me too. But with Mr. Williams's gratitude, I felt truly refreshed that we had a good ceremony. "Dad, it's okay now. I'll live positively." But Mr. Williams's gratitude was not over. A miracle happened to me. Mr. Williams offered to send me to college, and he said he would give me living expenses until I get into society and told me to quit my job. Mr. Williams supported me in the form of cheering for my dream. I felt like my stalled time was moving. I studied desperately so as not to betray Mr. Williams's feelings. I was also conscious of not indulging myself, saying, "This is really a miracle." And now I am studying at the medical school. I don't want to see children like me. I want to save people who lose their parents, give up their dreams, despair, and become lonely. I am just lucky to be able to spend my time like this. But there are people in this world who hit rock bottom. I want to give back more to those around me for the blessings I have. I think so.
Jake.
Mr. Williams. That day, Mr. Williams visited me after the college lecture.
How are you doing lately?
Mr. Williams, who is getting gray hair, was still unchanged in his elegant and gentlemanly behavior. Lately, well, the study is difficult, but I'm working hard.
Carter would be very happy.
Saying that, Mr. Williams smiled gently.
After finishing my sales rounds, I returned to the office to find it empty. Most of the lights were off. I always thought sales jobs required more motivation and hard work, but this department seems dead. Neither the director nor the manager seems motivated at all. They leave for a brief sales call, return soon after, and just relax with a cup of coffee. 2 years ago, a lively new recruit joined this place. A recent university graduate named Ethan Mitchell. He's 3 years younger than me and brings some energy to our otherwise dreary days.
I'm back.
While I was organizing the client information from today's visits, I heard Ethan's tired voice echoing in the empty office. "Hey, good job out there." I greeted my junior colleague with a stretched out voice.
Wait, is it just you, Don? Did everyone else already leave?
He looked at me with a surprised expression. I forced a smile and nodded.
Don, I'm starting to get worried about this department.
Setting his bag on the desk and taking a seat, Ethan leaned back in his chair. I feel the same way, I agreed, typing away on my computer. I've been thinking about finding a new job lately. Upon hearing this, Ethan shot up from his chair.
Hold on, Don. Seriously, that'd be a problem.
But I don't want to waste my time here. I get that, Ethan said, sitting back down. And then he booted up his computer.
Right, makes sense.
He murmured in a soft voice. You too, huh? I shifted my gaze from my computer to Ethan. He looked back at me with a disheartened expression.
It's tough to find any job satisfaction in this department, don't you think?
I couldn't help but nod in agreement.
If you leave, Don, I can't handle this department on my own.
It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that Ethan and I run the department.
But isn't it a bad look to switch jobs just 2 years out of university? Don't they say give it at least 3 years or something?
Ethan had a point. Still, my motivation for this job was downhill.
It might be okay for you, Don, since you've been here for 5 years, but for me.
When did this become such a lifeless department? Looking back, it started about a year ago. That's when our current director came in. He seemed unhappy with the transfer from the planning department to sales. Ethan has only known this unmotivated sales department for a year. Hey, maybe you should think about finding a new job too. You've got a knack for sales, you know? Ethan nodded slightly as he began to organize his client information.
If you're considering a new job, Don, maybe I should too.
He sounded unsure. Oh, by the way, I remembered something. Isn't your father a CEO, Ethan? Saying that, Ethan laughed weakly.
Well, he's a CEO after all.
Seeing his exhausted expression, I decided not to continue on that topic. There must be something going on with his family. I changed the topic to lighten the mood. By the way, are you prepared for the client meeting day after tomorrow? This time, I've left all the preparations for the client meeting to Ethan.
It's my first time handling everything, so I'm a bit nervous. I heard the director at the client's place loves fish, so I chose a traditional restaurant.
Good choice. They're a big client, so it'd be great if we can seal the deal. Let's give it our best. When I said that, Ethan gave a big smile. On the day of the meeting, Ethan and I arrived early at the restaurant we'd reserved. We checked out the restroom and had a brief chat with the staff, and then waited for our clients. It took Ethan several visits to get this client to even look at our materials and finally secure this meeting. After waiting for quite some time, the client arrived considerably later than planned. It seemed like they didn't consider our meeting important.
This is the place. I don't really like this restaurant. It's not to my taste.
Hearing his first words, I sighed internally. He looked down on us, treating us like we were beneath him. I glanced at Ethan, and he gave a wry smile.
Mr. Smith, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us today.
As Ethan shook Mr. Smith's hand in respect, I did the same. It seemed Ethan was a bit flustered. I prepared a business card and handed it to Mr. Smith. Nice to meet you. I'm Don Robinson from the sales department. Thank you for taking time out of your busy day for this meeting. Mr. Smith looked annoyed as he took the card and passed it to Mr. Taylor beside him. Mr. Taylor managed a stiff smile.
Is Mr. Thompson not joining us today?
I realized from Ethan's words. It seemed Mr. Smith wasn't originally planned to attend.
Thompson wasn't feeling well, so I made the effort to come. You should be grateful.
I was taken aback by Mr. Smith's arrogant attitude. I've met many people like him in sales, but it was disheartening knowing he's a top executive. When the food was served, Mr. Smith sneered.
Is this the best this place has? Who chose this restaurant?
The question was directed at me, but Ethan intervened.
Well, I chose this place. I hope it meets your expectations.
I prefer meat. I don't like nibbling on fish.
Mr. Taylor, sitting next to him, wiped sweat from his forehead. We continued with small talk and ate. Ethan seemed tense, and the conversation was choppy.
What kind of meal is this? It's not enjoyable at all.
The one who broke the silence was Mr. Smith. I stepped in for Ethan. Have you had a chance to review our product materials? Mr. Smith shook his head dismissively.
Taylor has gone through them, so it should be fine.
Mr. Taylor nodded when mentioned.
Yes, the materials were well prepared. I'm considering a contract.
Ethan's smile returned. Seeing that, I felt a wave of relief. However, just then, Mr. Smith, the senior executive, interjected.
Who put this presentation together?
Ethan replied, I did.
And how long have you been in sales?
Ethan answered, 2 years. Mr. Smith scoffed, letting out a condescending chuckle.
So you're telling me that some greenhorn who's only been in sales for 2 years made this presentation? You probably just copied it from another presentation, didn't you?
I clenched the glass in my hand, feeling a surge of anger. I knew how much time Ethan had spent on this client's presentation. He worked late every day, revised it multiple times, and consulted with me, giving it his all. And Mr. Smith was dismissing all that without a clue.
Mr. Smith, Ethan's presentation is well prepared and
Mr. Taylor, the department head, tried to intervene, but it seemed to fall on deaf ears.
Taylor, you're seriously incompetent. You can't even differentiate between good and bad work. You're unfit for your title.
Everyone was reprimanded, and the atmosphere in the room was tense.
Ethan, was it? If you want to do business with my company, you better step up your game. Maybe come back when you've learned a thing or two. We're just not on the same level.
Hearing Mr. Smith's words, I found myself reacting instinctively.
What the hell do you think you're doing?
Before I realized it, I had thrown my beer at Mr. Smith.
Don, what the hell?
Both Ethan and Mr. Taylor were taken aback by my sudden outburst.
You're gonna pay for this. I'm reporting this to your company.
As he yelled and pointed at me, Mr. Smith looked absurd.
I wouldn't sign a deal with your company if you were the last one on Earth. Remember that.
Leaving behind a biting remark, Mr. Smith stormed out of the room.
Mr. Smith.
Both Ethan and Mr. Taylor tried to follow him, but I ignored them, taking a big gulp of my beer. Oh, that felt good. I mumbled to myself as I waited for Ethan, hearing his hurried footsteps coming back to our table.
Don, what the heck did you do?
I'm sorry, Ethan. I ruined our chances at closing that deal. Hearing my words, Ethan slumped in his chair.
But more than that.
I'm probably getting fired. A dry, humorless laugh bubbled up from within me. The gravity of what I'd done was sinking in, but there was no undoing it.
You defended me, didn't you?
Ethan looked down, sipping his beer. I just couldn't stand it. He thinks he knows everything about you, but knows nothing. And he was talking down to you, and it just made me mad.
So, it's my fault after all.
I chuckled and playfully ruffled Ethan's hair. Well, what's done is done. Let's enjoy the night, have some good food, and head home. We weakly clinked our glasses together in a toast. A few days later, I was let go. I had to clean out my desk. I was called in early by the CEO and was told that if I wasn't fired, Smith's company would sever all contracts with ours. This would be a significant loss for our company. It was framed as a voluntary resignation. My only concern was leaving Ethan alone in a demotivated department.
Don, are you really leaving?
Ethan approached me with a look on his face like a lost puppy. It worked out for me. I was considering a job change anyway. When I said that, tears filled Ethan's eyes, and he shook his head.
It's my fault. I'll talk to the boss.
I grabbed his arm to stop him. Listen, Ethan, I truly believe it's okay. I messed up with your important client. I should be the one apologizing, right? Don't worry, I'll let you know once I find a new job. After hearing this, Ethan nodded with tears streaming down his face, looking resigned. A month after resigning, I hadn't found a workplace where I truly felt I belonged. Another day with no leads. I murmured as I headed back to my room. As I checked the mail in my room, a postcard caught my eye. The sender was Johnson Holdings, a renowned publicly traded company in the IT sector. I was surprised and flipped the postcard. It mentioned they wanted to meet for an interview, and I scratched my head, not understanding why. They want to interview me. Why would such a big-name company want to? I wasn't sure what was going on, but I decided to go for the interview on the date and time mentioned. If there's an opportunity, I'd grab it. That's what I thought, looking at the postcard. On the day of the interview, I stood in front of Johnson Holdings. When I showed the postcard at the reception, they quickly led me to a meeting room. I knocked and heard a voice saying, "Come in." There, waiting for me, was the famous Mr. Johnson.
I've been waiting for you.
I was motioned to sit on the sofa, and I said, "Thank you," before taking a seat.
You're Don Robinson, right?
I nodded, saying yes. "Thank you for taking the time to meet with me today." CEO laughed gently and said, "The pleasure is mine." He seemed like a kind person. He reminded me of someone, but I couldn't put my finger on it. Why did you invite me here today?" Looking a bit puzzled by my question, CEO replied,
I heard about a promising candidate from someone.
Clearing his throat, CEO gave a small smile. I couldn't think of anyone who'd recommend me to such a renowned company. Feeling out of place, I asked CEO, "Please be honest with me. This situation doesn't seem realistic at all. Even I can see that." CEO took a sip of his tea, looking a bit troubled.
It's hard for me to fake things.
I was puzzled by his words and tilted my head in confusion.
I promise not to disclose this, but, Don, do you know Ethan Mitchell?
I nodded. He was the important junior colleague I messed up with.
That Ethan Mitchell is my son.
What? I blurted out in shock.
When Ethan was in high school, I divorced his mother. I wanted him to take over this company, but when he graduated from university, he refused.
CEO said with a weary smile. I see. So that's why he didn't like being asked about his parents.
I'm aware of my selfishness. I've left everything concerning Ethan to my ex-wife and never really acted like a father should.
All I could do was listen.
But the other day, Ethan suddenly showed up at my place.
Ethan came to him and said he'd rather have me scouted for this company instead of him taking over. Why would? I didn't understand why Ethan would go to such lengths for me.
He said if it wasn't for you, he would have gone along with everyone else and turned out to be a lost cause. It's because of you that he's who he is now.
He said that. Seeing my surprise, the CEO asked, setting Ethan's story aside, "Do you like working in sales?" I confidently nodded. Of course I do. It's a job where I can make people happy with our amazing products. Hearing my answer, CEO nodded in agreement.
All right then, Don. How about working for this company? I want to work with you. What do you think?
Such an opportunity might never come again. Ethan's face flashed before my eyes, and I smiled. Ethan had put everything on the line to plead to his father for me. Wasting this opportunity would be letting Ethan down. Mr. Johnson, I might not be the best fit for such a big company, but I want to live up to Ethan's expectation. With that, CEO gave a warm smile and extended his hand. I'm back. I secured a deal and returned to my department. It's been 6 months since I joined Johnson Holdings. I still have a lot to prove.
Don, you're back. How was the deal?
I nailed it. As I said that, there was applause throughout the department. The sales department, where I was placed, was full of energy, nothing like my previous workplace.
Don, could you check this document for me?
The one who asked was Ethan. Due to my joining the company, the agreement between Ethan and his father was fulfilled, and now he also worked in the same company. It seems he's still hiding the fact that he's CEO's son. Got it. I'll review it. Go ahead and set up the appointment with the client. With shining eyes, Ethan nodded in agreement. Indeed, a fulfilling workplace makes a world of difference. Seeing Ethan working hard genuinely made me happy. If it weren't for Ethan, I'd probably be in a much worse place. Thanks, Ethan.
For what?
He looked puzzled. I owe Ethan a big time. He saved me. In my mind, I've always seen Ethan as a rival. Having such a great rival motivates me to work even harder. Ethan, the afternoon meeting's about to start. Hearing that, a cheerful shout from Ethan echoed throughout the office.
Ever since elementary school, I, who went by the name of Dexter, struggled with academics. Once I became a high school student, I wanted to graduate as quickly as possible. Deciding not to pursue university was an early decision. I couldn't find any sense in studying at school, except for crafting, art, physical education, and, well, lunch. Enduring things I didn't want to do was a pure pain. Instead, I wanted to start working early to get skill set needed. My name, Dexter, was given to me by my father, a carpenter. Apparently, he believed that if one has skills, would never starve. I heard this from my mother. I never asked my father about the origin of my name. He passed away from cancer when I was in the 2nd grade of elementary school. However, it feels apt to say that the name reflects the person. From a young age, I was good with my hands. I found it incredibly fun to change the shape of things in my hands at will. My mother would say, seeing the chairs, bookshelves, and small containers I brought home from the craft lessons in high school.
Like father, like son.
I don't know what she intended by that, but for me, it was the highest compliment. After all, it made me realize that I am the child of my father, who was the coolest to me. Upon graduating from high school, I got a job in a local factory that produces various machine parts, assembles large devices, and small equipment. The workforce, including part-time staff, was around 20 people. My seniors at work ranged from 20 to 50 years old, the oldest of whom was Mr. Brown, a seasoned veteran in this line for 35 years. He had the title of factory manager, but he always said, "Such a stuffy title doesn't suit me," and had everyone call him by a nickname derived from his last name. He was the archetype of a craftsman and spoke in rough language. I was taken aback by Mr. Brown's rough language when I first joined. However, Mr. Brown was an attractive person with a gap between his appearance and the actual person he was. He was as big as a bear, as his name suggests, but his work was quick and much more meticulous than anyone else's. Moreover, he was always smiling, so everyone loved him. Everyone, including Mr. Brown, was kind to me, who was just a high school student a few months ago. Except for Director Smith, the General Affairs Department. Despite having been at the factory for just about a year, he was the head of department, I heard, because our president had gone out of his way to recruit him. The reason being, Director Smith was a classmate of our CEO from high school and a former banker. Apparently, our CEO, who had long thought that the company needed a financial makeover, approached him for advice and he joined the company. He was just lucky to be picked up by our CEO when he dropped out of the bank's race for promotion. There were rumors to that effect in the company, but I didn't know what was true. The trouble was, the CEO had been hospitalized with a bad back about a month before I joined the company. By the time I joined, Director Smith was effectively at the top of the company.
I have been entrusted with full authority by the CEO.
Director Smith used to say this all the time. From Director Smith, I was marked early on after joining the company. I don't know what the direct cause was. My manners towards my seniors were not in place. My work was slow. My handling of products was rough. No matter how careful I was in my actions, Mr. Smith's nagging at me didn't change. One day, I was called into the office by Director Smith. There was an error in the document I submitted. Was it because it was a mistake that could have been caught with a little caution? Director Smith verbally attacked me more persistently than ever before. The people in the office who were there looked at me with pitying eyes but said nothing. Perhaps they didn't want Director Smith's mood to worsen and affect them. It was longer than usual. I thought to myself,
we can't take an employee like you, who has contributed extremely little to the company. On our next staff trip, we can't leave the company completely unattended. So this works out. I need you to stay behind and keep an eye on things. I let the CEO know that you're the one who said you can't go on the trip. Got it.
Director Smith rattled off all at once. It was a long-standing tradition at our company to go on a hot spring trip for relaxation on the last weekend of the fiscal month. Of course, all expenses were covered by the company. Although it was just an overnight trip, I heard that we'd be staying at a renowned luxury inn in town with a grand banquet in the evening. As the trip approached, the staff's morale was high. Listening to the stories of previous trips from those around me, my own anticipation grew. It was my first staff trip, and I had never stayed at a luxury inn before, so I was all the more excited. The fact that I am the only one left behind made me frustrating and infuriating. Mixed feelings well up. But I can't go against my boss's orders. I concluded that I have no choice but to do as Director Smith says. It was early next morning before work started. Mr. Brown, who had just returned from the office, was approaching me with wide strides. He was usually mild-mannered, but I could tell he was angry even from a distance.
"What's going on?"
Mr. Brown abruptly asked me. I didn't understand what Mr. Brown meant. Seeing my confused look, Mr. Brown, still looking angry, asked me again.
"What's this I hear about you staying behind during the staff trip?"
He must have heard about it when he went to the office. I was uncertain whether I should explain the situation to Mr. Brown. Then Mr. Brown unloaded on me.
"I've always thought his attitude towards you was too harsh. I can't take it anymore. I'm going to give him a piece of my mind."
I couldn't believe mild-mannered Mr. Brown would refer to Director Smith like that. I felt a surge of happiness knowing that Mr. Brown was going to bat for me.
"Just wait. I'll sort this out."
With that, Mr. Brown turned his back on me. "Mr. Brown, wait!" I called out to stop him. "Just knowing you care is enough. I don't want to make a big deal out of it. I'll keep the company safe while everyone is away, so it's okay." I tried my best to smile then, but I wonder how it looked to Mr. Brown. Mr. Brown scrutinized my face.
"I see."
Though he seemed to want to say more, Mr. Brown didn't say anything else and went to his workbench. A few days later, on the day of the staff trip, I came to work at the usual time. I opened all the shutters in the factory and office and turned on the office lights. It was the first time I had prepared for the start of the day alone since I joined the company. While preparing, I recalled my first day at work. That day, I had come in early to help prepare for the start of the day. I didn't have a key, but I planned to prepare with the first person who came to work.
You should try doing what your father did when he was a rookie. How about it?
That was my mother's advice. The first person to show up at the company was a big, stern-looking man. It was Mr. Brown. "Good morning." When I greeted him, the man smiled warmly and said,
"You must be the newbie, right? Nice to meet you."
That was the first time I heard Mr. Brown's thick accent. I was slightly taken aback, but seeing Mr. Brown's expression eased my tension instantly. Since then, it became my daily routine to prepare for the day with Mr. Brown. My promise to wake up by myself once I became an adult was nowhere to be found. After joining the company, I was woken up by my mother every day and arrived earlier than the other employees because my time with Mr. Brown was precious. Mr. Brown taught me carefully about his approach to work, his feelings towards product manufacturing, and technical tips. However, I could only have a thorough conversation with Mr. Brown for a few tens of minutes in the morning. Once even a single employee arrived at work, my interaction with Mr. Brown would end.
"We have to treat everyone equally. That's the burden of having a title,"
Mr. Brown explained to me once. I came to admire Mr. Brown, who could pay detailed attention to various people, and I felt happy that the person I wanted to aim for was nearby. The reason I remembered my first day of joining the company while I was alone in the company was that I had too much time on my hands. Since everyone is on a company trip, Just because the factory is open doesn't mean that I can operate the machinery. The only thing I could do was to play the role of a telephone operator, as Director Smith told me. Nevertheless, I was idle all the time as I only received 2 or 3 calls per hour. It was a while after eating lunch. Rain began to fall, hitting the office windows violently. I remembered the weather forecast I saw this morning, which said that a decent amount of rain would fall in the afternoon. That's unusual. It's actually accurate for once. The weather forecaster on the program I watched makes his own forecasts but often misses, so he is often teased by the host. Moreover, it was clear in the morning. As usual, the host was criticizing the weather forecaster's forecast on the program. I also didn't think that the weather would collapse this drastically. While listening to the sound of the rain, I realized something. Cardboard boxes for storing products from a major contract had been delivered yesterday. The problem was where they were placed. Since the contract was decided at the last minute, the warehouse was full, and they were temporarily placed outside. Even though there was an eve, it was clear that the cardboard would become unusable in such heavy rain. I started to panic and ran to the warehouse because I remembered that there were tarps. If I could cover it over all, I thought I could prevent it from getting wet to some extent. However, even one tarp was much heavier than I expected. I could only carry 2 at most at one time. I put the tarps I carried on the cardboard boxes. However, it was not going well because I was alone. Moreover, the rain continued. Why is this happening? I continued working while almost crying. That's when it happened.
I'll help you.
Suddenly, someone called out to me from behind. Who are you? I didn't have the luxury of asking such leisurely questions. The priority was to cover the cardboard with tarps. I continued to cover the cardboard with tarps with a stranger who suddenly appeared. The moment the number of people increased to 2, the work efficiency improved dramatically. We were able to cover all the cardboard boxes with tarps.
Did we manage to keep the damage to a minimum by any chance?
He appeared to be around 30 years old. The man asked. Thank you so much. I bowed deeply in gratitude.
No, you don't have to thank me. I'll pass your thanks to my dad.
The man said, chuckling. Something about his smile seemed familiar, but I couldn't put my finger on it. Regardless, the priority was to take shelter from the torrential rain, even if we were soaked to the bone. I invited the man to the office. I was lucky enough to find a towel in the office and gave it to him to dry his hair. Working in the rain had chilled me to the core. He was probably feeling the same way. I turned on the office heating. We both stripped down to our underwear to dry our clothes over a chair. I brewed some instant coffee and handed it to the man.
I'm Michael Johnson. My dad, the CEO, he talks about you all the time.
There was something candid about our conversation. Perhaps stripping down to our underwear had eliminated any awkwardness. Then it clicked. The reason why this man seemed so familiar. Johnson is the CEO's last name. I remembered hearing that the CEO's only son, who had gone to UK to get his MBA, was due to return soon. Apparently, he had come straight to the factory upon returning home. Michael had learned from his father that everyone else would be on a company trip that day. Despite this, he noticed that the office lights were on, but nobody was inside. Then he spotted someone running toward the factory. Curious, he stepped outside and saw me working in the rain. That's when he decided to approach me.
By the way, why are you here today?
Michael asked me. I wasn't sure whether to tell him the truth or not. He probably sensed my hesitation from my expression. Michael said,
My dad, or rather the CEO, was told about your situation by Mr. Brown. He was worried about you and asked me to offer you some advice when I returned.
It was then that I found out that Mr. Brown, like the CEO and Director Smith, was also a high school classmate. This explained why Mr. Brown had been so angry on the day I couldn't make the company trip, and why he had been referring to Director Smith as that guy. I couldn't tell if what Michael had said about the CEO worrying about me was true. Would the CEO really talk about me to Michael, who was overseas? Perhaps Michael was trying to trick me into telling him what had happened. Regardless, Michael's words convinced me to tell him the truth.
I see.
Michael listened to my story, a serious expression on his face.
That's definitely power harassment. If word got out, it could harm our company's reputation. We can't just let this slide,
he said calmly. A few days later, on the day the CEO was discharged from the hospital, I was summoned to his office.
I'm sorry.
The CEO began apologizing as soon as he saw me. I was taken aback, but the CEO continued.
It's all my responsibility.
I thought he must have heard about what I told Michael. After that, Director Smith, who had been harassing me, was demoted to a regular employee. The only reason he wasn't fired was because he showed deep remorse, and because, as a former banker, his financial knowledge was unparalleled in the company and necessary for internal reform. It's easy to let someone go. The true role of a leader is to develop their employees. The CEO's philosophy. Still, I wasn't sure if this change was a good thing for me. Because, after all, Mr. Smith has started to ask me about the procedures and know-how of the work, quite a bit. Apparently, he had been told by Mr. Brown to ask Dexter if you're not sure. Just until recently, I was being referred to as you, but after the reassignment, I'm being called with the formal Mr. Thinking it was a bit too much, I asked him to please call me with just Dexter. Though I hope this awkward relationship with Mr. Smith ends soon, I feel relieved to continue doing the job I love, surrounded by the people I care for, at least for now. Overwhelmed by the urban scenery after such a long time, I entered the designated restaurant. Led by a waitress to a room, it seems I am the last one to arrive. I apologize for being late. Mrs. Smith, Jessica's mother, says with a warm smile, "Don't worry about it. You're still on time." Jessica, too, looks a tad nervous but manages to smile. She carries herself with the elegance of a true lady from a prestigious family, and I can't help but be mesmerized. However, one person doesn't seem pleased, her father. He sizes me up from head to toe and gives a disdainful humph.
Now that Tom's here, shall we begin blind date dinner?
Urged by my father, I took a seat next to him.
I heard you run a small diner out in the boondocks of Nebraska.
Jessica's father asks in a critical tone. Yes, that's correct. When I returned home, I was struck by the luxury of savoring fresh, local produce. So I quit my job at the posh restaurant in New York and decided to start my own place. Jessica and her mother seem genuinely interested in my story, but her father remains unimpressed.
You left a small town, graduated from a top university in New York, landed a job in a major company, and then decided to go back home to become a cook. I won't let my daughter marry someone from a bottom-tier family like yours.
Facing my outraged father, I was taken aback. So the claim that they were eager for this blind date was a lie. Was it just a ruse by my father?
Bottom-tier family, huh?
My father murmured.
I deeply apologize for my husband's rude remarks.
Jessica's mother apologized immediately. She also looks apologetic.
There's no need for you to apologize. My daughter, Jessica, is the future CEO of our company. We've raised her to marry someone worthy.
Her father retorts, standing up.
I only agreed to this dinner because you said it was a good match, but this is going nowhere. This blind date is over.
He shouts at his wife.
As far as I'm concerned, that's just fine. We can't associate with someone who looks down on my son's profession and background.
I respond, agreeing with my father but feeling a bit disappointed. Leading the way out, Jessica's father exits the room, with a hesitant Mrs. Smith and Jessica following him.
I truly apologize for making you feel uncomfortable.
Jessica's mother says regretfully as she leaves the room, I shouldn't have come to this dinner in such a carefree mood. It'd be impossible to get someone like him to understand my perspective on life. The town where I grew up had a population of just about 3,000. It was a typical small town. I spent my days running around fields, climbing mountains, catching bugs, swimming in rivers, and playing from dawn till dusk. Things got a bit more convenient when an interstate passed through our town, but our way of life remained largely unchanged. My grandparents, whom I lived with, were farmers, so I often helped with the harvest. But my favorite times were spent cooking.
This is how you remove the stem from an eggplant?
My grandmother or mother would teach me as I helped out.
Tom, the food you make is so tasty.
My family would praise, making me yearn to learn and cook even more. I always thought I'd spend my entire life here. That changed when I got to middle school. My sister traveled 2 hours to high school, while my brother went off to a school in Chicago. Whenever my brother, who had moved away, returned home for holidays like Thanksgiving or Christmas, I'd hear about his life in the city, and it made me long for that urban lifestyle. I want to attend a high school in New York. When I shared my feelings, my parents, seemingly prepared for it, respected my decision. I then enrolled in a high school in New York City with a dormitory. Having studied in the calm atmosphere of the countryside, I was taken aback by the pace and culture of the city school, but I put in every effort to catch up. All the hard work paid off, and I made it to a top-tier university. While enjoying city life, I managed to maintain a balance between fun and studies, which eventually led me to land a job at a leading company. Living in the city was supposed to be my dream, but it wasn't. All I felt was suffocation. The tense interpersonal relationships, the constant noise, the feeling of always being rushed, it was crushing me. Yet, I felt I couldn't go back home. After coming this far, I felt like there was no turning back. My turning point came when I visited a fancy restaurant for a business dinner. It's delicious. In that moment, I felt a longing to create such dishes myself. I remembered how much I used to love cooking. I quit my job and decided to attend culinary school. After obtaining my cooking license, I began working at a restaurant in the city. Starting off was tough. I was relegated to tasks like cleaning, shopping, and dishwashing. And just when I thought I'd get to cook, I found myself peeling carrots day in and day out. But gradually, I was trusted with more. Prepping fish and meat, frying, grilling, boiling. After a decade, I finally became a recognized cook. Now, I can hold my head high when I see them. With that thought, I returned to my childhood home with high spirits. My sister had moved out after getting married, and my brother settled down in Chicago after finding a job and getting married there. My grandfather and mother had already passed away, leaving only my grandmother and father behind. The once lively and cramped house now felt empty and vast. My grandmother, now in her 80s, was still active and tending to her garden, and I decided to help her with the harvest. Cooking with the freshly picked vegetables, I was amazed at their taste. It was entirely different from the ingredients at the restaurant. I was deeply struck by how much flavor one can bring out by harvesting seasonal ingredients and cooking them immediately. Even though I had tasted this from a young age, I had completely forgotten. I want to open a small diner here. While surprised, both my grandmother and father happily accepted my proposal. I thanked everyone at the restaurant, especially my head cook, and left New York behind. I returned to my hometown to start the second chapter of my life. Aiming for local sourcing, I collaborated with local farmers for ingredients, experimenting to create the perfect dishes and setting up my diner. Of course, things didn't take off immediately. In the beginning, only a few local elderly folks would stop by, making the diner almost eerily quiet. Thankfully, with the rise of social media, even a small diner in the countryside can reach a global audience. I started posting photos of my dishes on Instagram, shared the cooking process on Facebook, and tweeted cooking tips. Additionally, I uploaded shirt recipe videos on YouTube and TikTok. From there, folks started following me, visiting my diner, leaving comments, and even promoting the place on Yelp or their blogs. It wasn't just locals. With increasing numbers of tourists wanting to experience the real America beyond just big cities like New York or LA, the number of foreign tourists traveling to the countryside is increasing. People like that see my posts on social media, visit the small eatery, and then share about it on their own social media, spreading the word. The traditional American cuisine was praised, and due to the influx of visitors to my diner, even local inns and souvenir shops saw an uptick in business, and I've been thanked for this indirect contribution. During this time, my grandmother suggested a potential match for me.
Tom, you don't have to if you don't want to, but it might be lonely staying single forever.
I've always wanted to get married, but approaching 40, I started to feel something like resignation. I was taken aback looking at the arranged marriage photos and profile. She worked for a major company and was quite the beauty. I wondered why she'd want to marry someone like me when she could easily find someone better. She's way out of my league. That's what I said, declining the offer. But my grandmother insisted, saying the woman was quite keen. So I agreed to meet her. Later, thinking I might as well make the most of my trip to New York, I decided to show my father around. I took him to a fancy restaurant I used to dine in frequently and introduced him to everyone. It felt good.
You don't miss living in the city anymore, Tom?
Asked by my father, I replied with a smile, not at all. Even if some folks might laugh, I feel more fulfilled now, running a small diner in countryside. Sure, it's lonely without a partner, but it's something I've come to accept. One evening, when I returned to my parents' house, the phone was ringing. Grandmother was in her room and seemed not to hear it. Hello. As I walked from the entrance to pick up the phone, a desperate voice cried out,
"Please, would you consider another blind date? We'll come to you this time."
It was Jessica's father. Wasn't it you who called off the last meeting? Confused, I responded, and the man explained. He seemed flustered when he realized that my grandmother was a major shareholder in his company. We inherited some land from our ancestors, and when a highway was being built, we received a considerable amount in compensation. My grandfather used that money to invest in stocks and other ventures. When grandfather passed, grandmother inherited those shares. My grandparents are on my mother's side. As my dad had a different last name and didn't take on our families, Jessica's father never imagined a connection. Didn't you want to avoid getting involved with a bottom-tier family from the sticks, did you? Upon my sarcastic remark, her father was extremely apologetic. Just then, my grandmother appeared. "Grandma, was I too loud? I'm sorry." Apologizing, she indicated she'd take over the call.
I've heard the story from Lisa and Jessica. After all the effort to arrange the meeting, you went and ruined it.
My eyes widened at grandmother's words. I learned from grandmother after that. When she had attended a foundation party for the company run by Jessica's father, she had greeted him and his wife. It was their first time meeting with her after the shares had shifted from my grandfather to grandmother. The CEO left his seat early, but grandmother continued chatting with his wife. Jessica joined in, and grandmother mentioned, "I have a grandson about your daughter's age." She spoke about me, my return to hometown, and my diner. Following that, Jessica and her mother visited my diner, loving the food. During that time, her daughter was drawn to the way I worked, and after she told her mother about it, the topic of this blind date came up. When I found out that my grandmother wasn't lying about the other party being very interested, I felt an uncharacteristic warmth spread across my face despite my age. I felt embarrassed, realizing that such a beautiful woman was actually interested in me. 2 weeks later, "Welcome." I cheerfully greeted the guests, but my words got caught in my throat. There stood Jessica and her mother.
My apologies for my father's rude behavior the other day. We wanted to apologize sooner, but things got busy.
It was a busy time in the diner, so I asked them to come back after closing hours.
My husband and I are getting a divorce, and I'll be taking over the company.
Jessica's mother's revelation was unexpected. The company was originally run by her father, and her husband had joined the family. Even after taking over the company and becoming the CEO, he acted as if the company was his own personal property and was domineering at home. Mrs. Smith endured it for years, thinking of her daughter, but decided to divorce after this matchmaking event.
He was thinking of Jessica as the next CEO, but I believe Jessica's life is for Jessica to decide.
Hearing those words, Jessica stared intently at me and talked to me.
Would you consider dating with marriage in mind with me if you're okay with it? Come. I want to know more about you.
My grandmother, sitting next to me, slapped my back hard.
Tom, why don't you reply like a man?
Please, it's my pleasure. Everyone cheered at my response.
I will do my best to support your business, Tom.
Jessica, smiling happily, looked as beautiful as a flower. Feeling immense happiness, I swore deep down that I would lead a happy life with her,